What's up? It's PENUEL, the Black Pen. I'm a bit nervous about this video that I'm making today because it is about one of the most sensitive aspects of South African politics, South African society, etc. It is the famous, infamous, highly controversial, highly sensitive concept of land. The land issue in South Africa. Sure. Sure. Must I take it from the top? Yeah. If we have a disturbance, I wonder if I should carry on. No, but let's say we do.
We should pause.
Why? So I don't mind tabs are coming in and me carrying on and being to people, sorry about two tabs and carry on.
Okay, cool.
Chilled. So there's no cut. We're carrying on from the top. Yeah, so I had to listen to my boss here who sees with Dube because he dictates my life. Let me take it from the top, even though I don't want that first part to be edited out. So today's video is made me a bit nervous because it is about one of the most contentious issues in South Africa, probably in the world at large, and that's the land issue in South Africa. Very controversial, very sensitive, very rooted in history, and our needing to importantly have this conversation. We speak about it so many times on various platforms. We need to speak about the land. We need to address the land. And we have all types of political parties at any given time using the land issue as a campaigning tool. But most South Africans don't know what this land issue is actually about. It's nice to recite scripts, sing slogans that you hear from your favorite political parties, but do you actually understand? I'm adding a disclaimer in the sense that this is my first formal attempt at this topic, and I think I'm going to mess it up in certain places. There's probably going to be certain data I'm going to give you that is not fully accurate because sources are not fully accurate, and also because some people might have more accurate information. But it's important that I have this conversation with you because it is fundamentally important for the people of South Africa to understand. Also fundamentally important is for you guys to challenge some of the things I'm raising here, whether philosophically, whether it's the data and the stats, whether it's just some of my opinions and perceptions of this issue, so that we can all engage robustly on the land issue in South Africa. So again, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm going to fumble around. I'm going to be going through my phone and messing up notes, but please allow me because this topic is important. By the time I do the 5th, 10th edition of this video, hopefully it'll be more slick and I'll have better data and better information and a better vision for you guys. But I urge you, in the comments, I urge you in various places where you discuss this video to engage robustly so that we can find common ground. I wrote down a list of 8 points. 8 points? Let me see here. Yeah, 8 points. And I'm going to go through each of them. An introduction is land doesn't belong to anyone. I've said this on certain videos and people don't kind of get what I mean. For those of you who believe in God, if you're religious, those of you who believe in nature, spirituality, this world we've been given, this world that we have, planet Earth, doesn't belong to anyone. Doesn't belong to your mom or your dad or some obscure billionaire or some family from history. It is as it is. It is nature. It's like the planet Mars or Jupiter. It belongs to no one. So when people tell you that this belongs to, fundamentally at its core, land doesn't belong to anyone. That's why birds don't have to ask for permission. That's why earthworms, that's why cockroaches and rats and lions, they don't have to ask for permission for anyone to roam this land. Land does not belong to anyone. That is very important. But then what happened on this land? Human beings existed, human beings gained consciousness, and with their consciousness, human beings decided, nah, I think this is going to be mine. And we started demarcating various parts of land, territories, based on family, tribe, race. Later on, we'd come up with the concept of a country, nations. Countries by themselves are not real. They were created by human beings, like money. Money is not real. It was created by human beings. Laws are not real. They are created by human beings. But where we find ourselves, as I make this video in June 2024, we now live in these human constructs called countries, nations. We have got flags, national anthems. We have got territories. We need passports and IDs. And many, many human beings have fought and killed on behalf of certain land that has been demarcated in certain ways and in various spaces. But fundamentally, land doesn't belong to anyone. In the South African context, today we speak about expropriation without compensation. And then the infamous markets have an opinion. No, we don't support that. That is not what we agreed with Nelson Mandela and CODESA. We have got a lot of political parties that have come and gone. The Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. We've had, of course, the African National Congress, the ANC, which spoke about nationalization, which spoke about land. Today we speak about the economic freedom fighters who have reinvigorated the land topic and the land issue. We had Andile Mngitama's Black First, Land First, the EFF being led by Julius Malema. And the land issue in 2024, 30 years after a so-called democratic South Africa and so-called black government rule, we still don't seem to have resolved the land issue. The black majority of South Africa still deem themselves largely landless, very poor. Maybe let me add this to my introduction. I once watched a video which spoke about the three components of capitalism and an economy. That formula, very basic, was something that I needed to finalize certain struggles I'd been having in my head at the time, figuring out what type of world we need to build, what type of world we live in. Fundamentally, an economy is made up of three components. The one component is labor, very importantly. I mean, for you to have an economy and money and inventions and this microphone and that camera, someone needs to put in labor to create this thing. Another component is what's called capital. Capital is in the form of equipment, tools. Some people call it money. But it's one thing to have labor, but I need a hammer. I need an axe. I need tools. I need money, maybe to get paid to ensure that I can create whatever it is I'm creating, including resources. Then comes this very, very important component of an economy and making money, and that's land. You can have all the labor you want, amazing, skilled, highly skilled labor. You can have all the capital, the money, the tools that you want. But if you don't have land, you can't build an economy. Economies are built on land. Whether the land is the United States of America, whether it is China, whether it is Germany, whether it is Japan, it is built on land. Even something like virtual economies on the internet, your Facebook, your Airbnb, your Uber, they have headquarters which are on land. They operate on internet infrastructure which is built on land, sometimes underwater, underground, in fiber, etc. But by and large, even the people that they serve, the person that's on that phone, the person that's on the computer, at some point needs to be on some type of land. We're not living in a fully virtual world, at least as yet. And even if we did, for you to exist in a virtual world, you must be in a real world somewhere. So we still need land. Land plus labor plus capital equals an economy. And in the South African context, at least, what happened and what's made this so sensitive and controversial is that certain people decided to hoard a majority of the land. And by default, also a lot of the capital, including mineral resources. And all that the majority of the people, in particular native indigenous peoples of South Africa, had was the labor. And to this day, the black majority in particular, including colored people, exchanged their labor for a little bit of land. Sometimes it's not even their land, they lease, and for access to capital, equipment, etc., so that they can make a little bit of money to exist. But the landlords are by and large still the same people from back then. And the concept of landlords is controversial the world over, to a point where Lizzie McGee, is it McGee? I think it's Lizzie McGee, Elizabeth, who created the board game Monopoly. It was initially called the Landlord's Game, was showing the importance of land ownership, leasing, rental income, and how you cannot build a sustainable economy by giving the land to a few people and keeping other people out. The board game of Monopoly comes to an end when you can no longer afford to pay rent on certain land you stay on. In the real world, it doesn't quite work like that, but because even if you can't afford, there's social welfare. There's people that squat illegally and. That's a bit of the intro. Going back a bit in history, or maybe far in history, I just want to reference these, and I welcome you guys to maybe add some meat to some of these references that I'm making. It would be really cool to do a deep dive in some of these, whether myself or whether it is YouTube videos, reading articles on the internet, reading books, on some of the histories, documented at least, of the world, and some of the biggest land fights and empires that have been built historically. The Mongolian Empire, those that might know Genghis Khan. You've got the Qing dynasty in parts of Asia or China, the Han dynasty, which was one of the biggest back then. We've had the Spanish Empire as well, part of them being the conquest of what we call the United States of America. It is not by accident that you have places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Those are Spanish names. Christopher Columbus was on a Spanish or Spaniard expedition. The Spanish Empire. You've got the British Empire, of which South Africa was a British colony, along with places like Australia, New Zealand, Zambia, I think Ghana, if I'm not mistaken, Jamaica, and some of the islands. We had the Roman Empire, your Julius Caesars, also very, very famous. We have had historic wars, very famous wars on land and conquest in time memorial. And these are just the documented ones, and I can tell you now, there are so many more. There have been some of these on the African continent, way before colonizers came. They may be not as documented as we'd like. We speak about the great empire of Kemet as an example. There were migrations, and from the history that we've been taught of the world being one landmass and breaking up, where you had the Indus River and India, you had China, you had Europe, you had the Americas, and you had Africa as the cradle of humankind. There have been fights over pieces of territory. People have fought for fertile land. You've got livestock and you want to graze. People have fought for land that is abundant in fruits, in vegetables that are indigenous and where people can eat. People have fought for coastlines, which has an abundance of sea life for food. People have fought for land that has got healthier weather. Today, or in recent history, people have fought for land for minerals, where they have found oil, gold, diamonds, copper, platinum, lithium, etc. So human beings have been fighting over territories before we had these so-called countries and nations, etc. It would come later when we have the countries that we have today and the United Nations. Point number 3. At the Berlin Conference in Germany, think about 7 countries decided to put up their hands in what is called the Scramble for Africa. And all of them decided to lay a stake in various parts of the continent. Sadly, in 2024, a lot of those colonial borders still exist, which actually adds a complex layer to the land issue in South Africa. Today, we've got political parties that speak about illegal foreigners. We've got terms like xenophobia that have been peddled with African immigrants, migrants coming to South Africa and being attacked in various ways. Various Africans have come into South Africa, whether legally or what we call illegally because they don't have the right paperwork, to come here and work. Some end up committing crimes, etc. And the reason we have a South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique, as SADC, and then you can go further into Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, Kenya, the DRC, and then you go Ghana, West Africa, you go up north, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, Sudan, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, Cameroon, Senegal, Sierra Leone, etc. It's because of these countries, these 7 countries that decided to lay stake. And today we still have those colonial remnants, and that's why I'm speaking English today, because we weren't colonized by the French. I'm not speaking Portuguese because we weren't colonized by the Portuguese. So some of the territories of Britain that they decided to grab would be South Africa, Ghana, Egypt, Sudan, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania. Germany would take places like Namibia, Cameroon. Portugal would take places like Mozambique, Angola. France would take places like Sierra Leone, Benin, Senegal, Algeria. The French would take big parts of Northwest Africa, Guinea, Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso. You had Italy take places like Eritrea, Somalia. And you had Spain take places like Morocco. And then you had Belgium, very popular, King Leopold, take on what was known as Zaire, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, arguably the wealthiest country on the planet in terms of natural mineral resources, but also the one place with most rampant poverty and the most wars and coups that happened there. The scramble for Africa. Africa got colonized. Today we still have colonial borders. You have parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters, some as well that speak about Pan-Africanism. There were thoughts of an African Union, specifically led under Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, to say we need to unite Africa under a common currency. And even Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, when she was chair of the African Union, spoke about having one passport where Africans can travel freely, just like Europeans have a European passport. And even if you travel as a foreigner, you can get a Schengen visa, where you can very comfortably travel between certain European countries. What helps there, of course, is that the economies are relatively stable, their political environments are relatively stable, and it's not a matter of mass migration like a Mexico into the United States of America or a Zimbabwe into South Africa, for example. South Africa has had its own land wars that are documented and are quite popular. This is point number 4. We had pre-colonial wars, maybe not as famous, sadly, and a lot of these are not taught in our schools. Maybe for obvious reasons, we don't know. We had colonial wars. We had a very big Anglo-Boer war called the South African War today. You know, there was the struggle against apartheid as well, which could arguably be called a land war in itself. Some of the more documented wars in South Africa were the First and Second Boer Wars. The Anglo-Zulu War, we've got wars like Ngome, the Battle of Blood River. We had the Sekhukhune Wars, we had the Basotho Gun War. There were wars for territory around Lesotho, what we call the Free State today. And even some of the leadership in Lesotho still believe parts of Gauteng and the Free State belong to Lesotho terrain. And I remember Mshweshwe giving some parts of his land to Afrikaners in some of their clashes and agreements there, which led to some of what we call the Free State today. We had some of the Xhosa Wars, Mfecane Wars, some of the internal wars, wars against certain tribes, wars with the colonialists, wars with the voortrekkers. And then the fight for liberation, for many, was a fight for land. Where today a lot of your politicians will tell you we now have a right to vote. You can vote, we have political freedom. Some people say we were not fighting to vote. We were fighting for land. Because our land is our economy. When the colonizers came, they shafted us off our land, which involved losing some of our livestock and our livelihood. And that's what we were fighting for. We weren't fighting to stand in a queue and to pick a representative to sit and decide. We want our land back. This video is mostly about that issue. In South Africa, we've had British rule from the Union of South Africa. After the Brits, and having sat recently with the advocate Ike Khumalo, one of the things he raised was the Brits had just come off 2 world wars. They didn't have many resources, and they decided to take a step back from some of their colonies. And in doing that, they decided they needed representatives and ambassadors. Look, we still had lords that were running aspects of South Africa. We had a Union of South Africa, and they ran this country as a union. And later on, the Afrikaners would get into parliament, get into politics, get into the National Party, and run this country. Black people were shafted off their land, and they started fighting. And come 1990, there was the unbanning of liberation movements. And in 1994, the ANC government of Nelson Mandela came into power. 30 years later, we're here now. That is our more recent history. British rule under a union, apartheid rule under the National Party, and then post-democratic Africa under the ANC. This is very interesting to note because most people are not aware. Apartheid under Verwoerd was enacted in 1948. 1948, and it would last until 1990. The Land Act, the Native Lands Act, the Bantu Land Act, is from 1913. Not when apartheid started in 1948, but years before that in 1913. So when people believe that it's only Afrikaners, it was all the white leadership of the time that were in agreement that the black majority of this country needed to be forcefully removed off of the majority land of this country. 1913. It would only be 35 years later that apartheid would be enacted. The agreements of the 1913 Native Lands Act or the Bantu Lands Act, what they agreed on was that black people should only occupy 10% of all land in South Africa. Mind you, black people have always been 80% of the population in this country. But that 80%, they decided should occupy only 10%. And when they enacted this, they got it right with 7% of the land. 80% of the population on 7%. There would be 23 years of fighting thereafter where black people would eventually be on 13% of the land. From 7 to 13%. That is where black people were forced to live. Over time, there'd be black people that would then start moving into what we'd call townships, some informal settlements because the white areas needed domestic workers. They needed gardeners. The mines in particular needed laborers, people that would go down and dig. Some of the farms, some of the factories. So there'd be what we'd call white areas with black people traveling with taxis, minibus taxis, to these areas. According to the 1913 Native Land Act, white people could not sell land to black people. What's even worse is that even black people that were leasing land from white people could not lease that land. If there was a land owned by white people on a farm and black people were subleasing that land, they could not. It was not allowed. What was protected was the communal land by the kings and the chiefs, which we still see to this day. The dispossession of the land of black people included things like livestock. There was a killing of livestock or the straight up theft of livestock, but theft legally. The crops that were on there and even any infrastructure and homes that had been built by black people on these lands. Black people were forced to become laborers in white areas, but with minimal wages, exploitative wages. And sadly, along with these, black people could not get a decent education like white children. We speak about Bantu education today. That was point number 5. Point number 6 starts with now the formation of what became the ANC. Educated black man, writer, spoke good English, John Langalbalele Dube, used his newspaper to start speaking about the atrocities of this Native Lands Act. And he'd be joined by other people, Pixley Kaisaka Sem and other other gentlemen that formed the African National Congress back then, all the way in 1912. They began the fight for black people from apartheid, which would come in 1948 along the way, oppression, People like Saul Plaatje were involved as well. And some of these people travel all the way to England to go and fight, to go and ask for the British monarch to intervene with what's happening in South Africa. These fights would end in 1990 with the loss of many lives, imprisonment, and other atrocities. I think we've spoken a lot about the fight for liberation in this country. The ANC, the PAC, we'd have Mangosuthu Buthelezi, Inkatha Freedom Party, the IFP come in. There'd be AZAPO, there'd be the guerrilla wing of the ANC that was forced because the negotiations and the conversations were not going anywhere. The MK. You'd have APLA, another military wing. You'd have stories like June 76, where the youth were gunned down, fighting against Afrikaans being a language of instruction. We'd have the women marching to the union buildings. I think they were led by people like Charlotte Maxege. Not sure if all Victoria Mxenge were involved. We had Abo Solomon Mahlangu, a young boy that was killed as an activist fighting for the freedom of this country. Even in the early days of the unbanning of the parties, we had Chris Hani. I think a general of Umkhonto weSizwe gunned down in his home. Very tragic at the time. Names came out, Struggle Warts, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Reginald Tambo, Nelson Mandela, of course, Mangaliso Sobuwe, father of black consciousness, Stephen Bantu Biko. We had people like Joe Slovo, Helen Joseph involved, and so many other people fighting so that black people could have a say in how this country is run from a political governance perspective, fighting also for the land to be given back to the people who occupied it. The Native Lands Act, the Bantu Land Act of 1913, was not a war per se in the conventional sense where weapons were picked up and people fought and black people were conquered in that war like some of the empires. It was a legal act where the tools of the state, the machinery of the state, the soldiers, the police were used. Places like Soweto, Alexandra, Tembisa, some of the informal settlements. Today we have songs about Meadowlands, Sophia Town, where people were shafted off of their land. One of the saddest parts of what's happened since the ANC has come into power is all the land that was forcefully taken has not been ring-fenced so that everyone is aware, and then it becomes a process of how do we deal with this? Instead, what the ANC government and others in government at the time have done is they've almost asked people to pitch. Where was your land taken? Come prove and, when that should have never been the case. But I do understand that it's complicated. Some of our history is well documented. We get to 1994, Nelson Mandela gets voted in to be president of South Africa. They get a government of national unity with F.W. de Klerk coming in with the National Party. They have some of the ministers from the apartheid government sit there. After Mandela comes Thabo Mbeki. After Thabo Mbeki comes Jacob Zuma. At some point, there's a caretaker president, being Kgalema Motlanthe. After Jacob Zuma, we have Cyril Ramaphosa, and we are here today. Black people in South Africa have gotten poorer over the years. Income inequality has increased. The access to land of black people seems to have not changed effectively. And the ANC government, we can add the IFP that's been in government since then. We can add other parties that have got black leadership. Parties like the ACDP, parties like the PAC, which has been in government, AZAPO, new parties now, maybe the EFF, to say, guys, this thing has not been resolved as yet, of which the one thing is to fix the 1913 Native Lands Act, but then to go beyond that and to speak about the scramble for Africa and the borders and how we want to maneuver around that. Because at the end of the day, when I go back to my intro, land does not belong to anyone. But we're here today. Colonial borders, the Native Lands Act, British colonial rule, apartheid Afrikaner rule, and then a black democratic government under the ANC, but it seems that the lived realities of the people on the ground still haven't changed fundamentally. With British colonial rule came the concept of private land ownership and title deeds. Let me deviate if I may. There is nothing more powerful in the world than language. Language has the ability to create things that do not exist. One of my favorite YouTube videos is of an author and a speaker called Yuval Noah Harari, an Israeli gentleman who's written books like Sapiens, Origin. He speaks about the concept of, he answers the question of why human beings rule the world. And he speaks about this concept of a fictional reality and an objective reality. Most animals live in an objective reality. He references elephants, lions, chimpanzees. They see a tree, they see a banana, they see water, they see mountains, all the natural things that everyone sees, an objective reality. Human beings also see objective realities. Animals, the mountains, the oceans, the rivers, rocks, minerals, vegetables, fruits, fish, sea life, etc. But human beings have this added layer of a fictional reality. And fictional realities are created by language, story, imagination. A fictional reality is something like money. A human being can take a paper money, go and give it to another human being and get something real like food. Animals don't do that. They do not exchange seashells. They do not exchange other non-essential things for real things that they may need. They exchange what we call bartering in the progress of the money journey or money history. Human beings have created fictional realities like money, laws. There are, of course, laws of the jungle. Animals pee somewhere, there's territory, animals fight. But it's not a matter of this law doesn't allow you to do that, where you get to a robot while you're moving, it's red and you stop, where the next animal just carries on moving. Laws like human rights, the right to running water, these are human creations. Some of these fictional realities include countries. I'm South African. I'm an American, the American dream. I am from China. I am from Taiwan. I'm from North Korea. I'm from South Korea. I am from Brazil. I am from Uruguay. I am from Argentina. These are human-created constructs that we have all bought into, and they've been solidified through movies, books, anthems, flags, the Olympics, World Cups, etc. The power of language has been captured in written word. And what's happened is that over history, written word has become sometimes more powerful than anything else. They speak about the pen being mightier than the sword. Wars have been fought over pieces of paper. I have a paper here, a constitution. I have a paper here, a title deed. I have a paper here, a piece of money. I have a paper here, it's called a marriage contract. I have a paper here, it's called an agreement to provide some service or product. Piece of paper could be an ID, a passport. It could be a visa, a permit, a piece of written paper. And some of the most famous criminals and fraudsters in history have been people that have doctored documents, that have manufactured fraudulent documents. Hey, I'm a doctor of what. There's an ANC leader who has a fake doctorate. If you watch a movie called Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, he plays on this idea of human perception and imagination, and that when you show a human being a piece of paper that's written, they easily buy into a concept, whether there's a check, whether it is a title deed, whether it is a certificate claiming that I'm a certified professional. There are people that have scammed others trying to sell them the Eiffel Tower, as an example. Fake documents. Bribing someone to give you a driving license to claim that you actually drove and they can qualify that you actually can drive, but you can't because you just paid for a piece of paper. Language, of course, comes in the alphabet, but it also comes in numbers. Numbers in themselves tell stories, percentages. When we start speaking about propaganda, something like the world map, which is a picture on a piece of paper, is inaccurate. Those of you who believe in conspiracy theories, please go and do the research. The world map is not drawn according to scale. It is now becoming more of a known truth, but we still all kind of believe in this map. That is the way it is. And as much as we all sort of believe that the world is round and not flat, we still all kind of believe that Africa's at the center. That's just perception. That's story. Depending on how you move, an atlas, a globe, the center could be anywhere. The top and the bottom could be anywhere. We speak about north and south, another story. Language, story, the ability to sell a story very well will have you believing human beings landed on the moon. There are 9 planets, 8 planets, 10 planets. Pluto might be a planet, it might not be. We can go live on Mars. No, the first person to step on the moon was this person. Do you know Julius Caesar said this, Queen Cleopatra belonged to this nation? Do you know that this person had lineage from this country? Do you know the richest man of all time was Mansa Musa? Do you know one of the wealthiest people is John D. Rockefeller? The Rothschild family created formal banking. There was the Medici family that was involved in banking. South Africa is owned by a few families, the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts, and the rest of us are puppets. Story. The person who can use language to sell the best story gets to own what we call the truth. This includes numbers, stats, and data. 22% of people own this, 50% of people own that, and that's how it goes. Today in South Africa, we are owned, controlled by a piece of paper called the Constitution, which most South Africans are forced to abide by. And the rest of the world has gotten us to kind of all agree that it's one of the best written in the world. But it was not written by the majority of people in this country, but by a few representatives. And it seems to have helped those who committed atrocities in the past not really be held accountable. Yet it does speak about expropriation of land. And that same piece of paper, when other people conveniently don't want to speak about those parts of the Constitution, it speaks about fixing the injustices of the past. But some people very conveniently will speak about, no, we need to speak on merit, things like black economic empowerment and land. It's reverse racism when it's convenient. Because of title deeds and that story, many uneducated, miseducated, undereducated people get cheated every single day out of land, out of property, out of their money. We speak about things like legal contracts that no one reads. Whether you're getting a banking loan, whether you've just gotten married, brilliant divorce lawyer that sits on Soft White Underbelly and on other podcasts speaking about the marriage contract is one of the most life-changing contracts that people enter into, but they don't even know what it is that they're signing. An employment contract, what it binds you to. Some people buy homes and they don't know what house they're buying and what problems it has. Then you have terms like voetstoots. Take it as it is. Today we speak about the Consumer Protection Act, CPA. We speak about, what's this privacy? POPI Act. Pieces of paper. And these pieces of paper contain our minds to a point where sometimes a violent person, a muscular person, gets dominated by a weak, small person because of a piece of paper. And you respect someone because on paper it's written, this is Dr. Whoever. On a piece of paper it's written, this is President Whoever. Newspapers sell propaganda and story. History books, if you've ever read my favorite book, 1984 by George Orwell, sell propaganda and a perception of the truth. We speak of, imagine if the lion could tell its tale instead of the hunter. The hunter always gets to tell the tale. The victor gets to dictate what history is, whether it's true or not. Even today, in recent history, You get told that people like Jacob Zuma are criminals. And some people are like, he's not. Robert Mugabe was a dictator and a tyrant. And other people say, no, he liberated us and gave us land. People say Donald Trump is crazy. And other people say he's a great leader. People say Vladimir Putin is a bloodthirsty dictator. And others say, no, he's a liberator for his people. In real time. In 100 years, 500 years, the person who is in power at the time gets to dictate whether Nelson Mandela was a sellout to the black majority or whether Nelson Mandela was a liberator of his people. You cannot trust history books. You cannot trust the media, newspapers, and the news. I'll go in so far as to say you cannot even trust your own memory. Sometimes you look at photos of your childhood and you're like, I don't even remember where I was and what I was doing. Imagine if someone else was to tell you, I know exactly where you were and what you were doing. And they tell such a convincing story that you believe it. Until someone else tells you that's not true at all. You weren't there and you're not doing that. There's a concept called the Mandela effect, which speaks about what you thought was true and whether it's not anymore. In a South African context, I'll speak about a clothing store that is called Markham. No, but it's called Markham's. Are you sure? It's always been called Markham. No, but it was called Markham's. Some people debate whether the man on the Monopoly board game, does he wear a monocle or not? The Mandela effect comes at a time when they say the real Mandela passed away in prison and a fake Mandela came out after. And there are many examples of some of these. Speaking about propaganda language and a lot of the propaganda that's peddled today is that white people in South Africa own 80% of the land. No one goes to read the data, the stats that's out there, whether real or not, but it's there. 80% of land in South Africa is owned by white people. I have to give a shout out to Wandile Sihlobo. He's an agricultural economist. He's one of the guests I'm hoping to host on the PENUEL show. And some of the other people that have sat to crunch the numbers, look at the data and speak on some of these issues and write articles and do interviews. Many people never want to listen to this. I'm making this video for this point number 7. I said I've got 8 points. Point number 7 is the reason I'm making today's video. What is the land situation like in South Africa currently? Gave you philosophical, land doesn't belong to anyone. Told you about empires and historic land wars. Told you about some of the scramble for Africa and the colonial borders. Spoken about some of our wars over land and territory in South Africa. Spoke about the 1913 Native Lands Act, the Bantu Land Act. Apartheid, British rule, the ANC government. But when we speak about land and we complain, at least in a South African context, where are we? 80% of the land is owned by white people. Who told you that and where does it come from? I'm here for point number 7. When I take a step back, the 1913 Lands Act wanted black people to be on 10% of the land. They got to 7%, 23 years later they fought and it got to 13% of the land, which would leave 87% of the land in white hands at the time. South Africa conducted a land audit in 2017. It is available on the internet. You can Google the South African Land Audit 2017. There needs to be an update, of course, and there are many other people who can do their own research on land. Very, very importantly. One of the myths is that white people own 80% of the land. Where do I want to start? Let me see. I gave you that number. I'm going to give you a number that normally trends on Twitter. It's a screenshot of a graph that was shown on the news at some point, which the EFF and other black voices have used to speak about the land issue in South Africa. This graph shows that 72% of land in South Africa is owned by white people, 72%, and only 3% is owned by black people. That graph that normally trends, it's got different colors if you've ever seen it, is actually only about farmland. And it's only about 37 million hectares of farmland. It's not about the whole country, but it's used as propaganda. Let me take another step back. This is where I know I'm going to fumble badly, because now we're speaking numbers and data. And unfortunately, I don't have graphics here. Once we have a bit more money, we'll add graphics. Let me give an overall first. South Africa sits on 122 million hectares. Very important. 122 million hectares. You can go and then compare it with other land sizes. And maybe when I create more robust videos, I'll be like, it's the equivalent of this place or that place or whatever. South Africa sits on 122 million hectares. A hectare is the size of a rugby field. 100 meters by 100 meters. 100 meters by 100 meters is 1 hectare. South Africa sits on 122 million hectares. Let's give a breakdown from the land audit. 30% of this land is in private hands. 30% is in private hands. That means your mom and your dad that have a title deed, your aunt and uncle, your friends, white people in the suburbs that have a title deed is in private individual hands. 30% of the 122 million hectares. Some of the easiest land to audit, the privately owned at the deeds registry. Outside of the 30%, 25% of the land is owned by companies. Now it becomes tricky. 25% by companies. Company could be Clover, could be Afgri, it could be African Rainbow Minerals, it could be Aspen, it could be Bidvest, it could be Batu, it could be Tsepo Jeans, it could be More Fire, it could be Rainbow Chickens, it could be Sun City, could be Nasrec, Kaizer Chiefs Village. Companies registered at the CIPC own 25% of the land. Hopefully that is not also too difficult to audit. Give us a list of all companies at the CIPC and land that is owned by these companies, and then we can do a deeper dive into these companies. Who are the directors? Sadly, directors change. The directors in 1994 could have been 10 white guys. The directors in 2024 could be 3 white guys, 4 colored guys, 3 black guys. So in your head, you might be like, oh, so there's diversity here. But now the problem with the company is it's not necessarily owned by the directors at the CIPC. It could be owned by a private shareholder somewhere else who owns 70%, but they're not even a director in the company. There's a share certificate somewhere. So it adds that complexity as a layer. But we can say these companies here, especially the big commercial farms like ZZ2 in Limpopo, Clover, Afgri, as I said, Heidelberg and Karen Beef, they own this much land here, the mines, etc. Some of the tourist attractions. These companies own this land. 25% of the 122 million hectares in South Africa are owned by companies. Then a further 31% is owned by trusts. You'd think it's as easy as companies, but it's tricky. A trust is like a vault. It's like a vault where you can go and put assets there and it almost cannot be touched. It's got trustees who could be accountants, lawyers, bankers, and then it's got beneficiaries who could be a charity organization. The beneficiary could be a company. The beneficiary could be individuals. It could be someone's children. I know Johan Rupert and family, their money operates under a trust, and other wealthy families as well operate through a trust. They don't operate as individuals. So you might go and look for Johan Rupert and ask, what land does he own? It's like, oh, he doesn't own any land. You're like, but this doesn't make sense. And it's like, no, his land is owned under either a trust or a company. And in that company, maybe he's the majority shareholder. So you say, okay, no, that's him. He might not even be a director. In the trust, he's not even maybe a trustee. The trustee is some lawyer. Is he a beneficiary? He might be. Or maybe he's not even. The beneficiaries are his kids, or the beneficiaries are his companies. So there's not even a human being that's a beneficiary there. So where does he live? Oh, he lives in a property that is owned by a company or owned by a trust. It's not owned by him. It becomes difficult to audit. This could be a house. This could be a farm. It could be any parcel of land. 31% under trusts. And the deep dive into trusts and companies is very complicated. The land audit tries to be thorough, but it has many limitations, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. It's quite a document. Go and check it out if you have the time. 30% private, 25% companies, 31% trusts is the land of South Africa. 30 plus 25 makes it 55. 55 plus 30 takes 31, takes it to 86%. 86%. There's a remaining 14. 14% of the 122 million hectares in this country are owned by the state, by government. Your government, which could be run by the ANC, could be run by the DA, could be run by a coalition government, could be run by a government of national unity. The government, the state, controls and owns 14% of the land. Some of it they need to use to redistribute to people. Some of it they lease out. Some of it they have government initiatives on that land. 14%. I left out a crucial one. That makes 100%. The communal land on this country that is owned by kings and chiefs, etc., falls under trusts. That's 31%. So all the tribal land falls under 31%. And I went and I did a dive. Let me see if I've got this number here. 14%. So we'll say of the 31% of trusts, almost half is what we call tribal land. Almost half is tribal land. Let me try and paint a picture. I know it's a bit tricky without graphics. 122 million hectares, the whole of South Africa. The generally black government controls 14%. Let's say about 15% for ease. Your kings and your chiefs control under a trust another 14, let's say 15%. That means 30% of the land is under some type of black control, whether it is the government or your king or your chief. 30%, leaving 70%. But this doesn't mean the 70% is owned by white people, because part of it is private land, 30% of the 70. And in this private land, it's got its own breakdown of demographics. Part of it, 25%, is owned by companies. Again, it could be broken down by demographics. And then the other half of the trusts also could be broken down by demographics. But at least 30% of the land in this country is under black ownership or black control of some point. Some things to note. Just South African demographics for those that are watching this and are not South African or don't know the numbers. South Africa has an 80% black African population, an 8% white population, an 8% colored population. The colored nation were from the mating, breeding, whatever you want to call, of white people, some of the Khoi and San, Amaxhosa, today maybe some of the Zulus and other black nations that created mixed race children, who then had children with mixed race children to create a colored community in South Africa, which is 8%. Tyler, who's become an international superstar, has gone on to speak about how she's proudly colored, whereas someone like Trevor Noah, who's got a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother, is more mixed race. It's like a first generation colored, so to speak, mixed race. And then we've got colors, and then you've got people like Warwick Stock, who sat on the PENUEL show, DJ Waras, who believes that he is Zulu, even though he is also mixed race. I think he's first or second generation. 8% colored and then about 2% Indian in South Africa. King Kudu Zwelithini, who was the king of the Zulus, who's now been succeeded by his son, Misuzulu Zwelithini, controls the Ingonyama Trust, which is the biggest parcel of land under a trust and under a king in this country. I believe the Oppenheimer family, whether through trusts, companies, and privately, own the biggest parcel of land as a family. I'm not sure of that percentage there, but you can go look that up. It includes game farms, nature reserves, etc. Ingonyama Trust has 2.8 million hectares under it. Land that is meant for the Zulu nation and the Zulu people. Of the 62 million South Africans that we have, 17 million of them live on tribal land. That's that 15% of land under trust under a king or a chief. 17 million of them live on tribal land, which is about 16 million hectares in total. The South African government has built over 3 million RDPs, which are free housing for the poor since 1994, over 3 million. At an average of 3 people per house, that's 9 million, maybe 10 million people that have been given housing. And you can imagine these RDPs sit on land. And as the current law stands, if you get an RDP house, you can't sell it within 8 years. After 8 years, you get the title deed and it becomes yours, the house, with that small piece of land that it sits on. So that becomes a way that the government has given land to people as well. Going back to the demographics. 80% black, 8% white, 8% colored, 2% Indian. When we look at urban land, in urban spaces, of which I think it's less than 1% of total land, 49% white owned, almost 50%, that is owned by 8% of the population. 30% black owned by people that are 80% of the population. 8% Indian, 8% colored. The colors in urban land are well represented. 8% of the population, 8% of ownership under urban land, which is about 722,000 hectares. The Indians are overrepresented. They are 2% of the population, 8% land ownership. Black people are 80% but own 30% of urban land. White people are 8% but own close to 50% of the land. That's urban land, your residential spaces. You can see there aren't really that many or that much land in it at least. Farmland, which I referenced earlier, at 37 million hectares, according to the land audit, 72% white owned by an 8% white demographic, 72%. Coloreds, being 8% of the population, own 15% of farmland. Indians, at 2% of the population, own 5% of farmland. And black people at 80% of the population own 3% of farmland, which is 37 million hectares. Again, I'm jumping around and I apologize. I think some of these things are better to see in graph format or to read and to contrast and be able to put data side by side. I want to see where I go from here. Some of the articles that have been written and some of the work that's been done by people like Wandile Sihlobo, a guy like Johan Kirsten, these are lecturers and people that work with academic institutions. I'm going to read just some of the pieces. This is specific to farmland and then also going into some of the work that the ANC government has done since 1994. This is from an article that I found online. White people own 80% of the land. I've spoken about this myth. And there are 40,000 or just over 40,000 known and registered white farmers who own about 78% of farmland, which is 50% of total land in South Africa at 77 million hectares. This is according to an article. This is not me now linking everything that I've put together. So almost think about it separately. 50% of total land, 77 million hectares, 50% of it, 80% of that land owned by white people. Now, if you include small farmers, including black farmers, this comes up to 240,000 people. The majority of farmers in this country are black people that own smaller parcels of land. For people that may not know, commercial farming is not defined by the size of the land, but by the income and the turnover that you make. And in South Africa, we've got 2,600 big farms that turn over 22 million rand or more per annum. They are responsible for 67% of total farm income. That's 2/3 of all the income from farms. Just 2,600 farms out of the 240,000 farms in general, and also out of the 40,000 farms owned by white people. Since 1994, how much land has the ANC redistributed? Because they started a Redistribution and Restitution Program. One of the failures of that program, and I know they tried this in Zimbabwe under Mugabe, was willing buyer, willing seller, which means you must be willing to buy. Black people are going to be funded through state money, and then the white farmer, the white landowner would be willing to sell. Most owners of the land, white people at least, have been refusing, just like they did in Zimbabwe. That's why some people admire what Mugabe did, which sadly has been reversed, or there's been an attempt to reverse it by Emerson Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, who's actually even welcomed white people back into Zimbabwe to come and take ownership of the land, and even offered to pay them money to come and be on this land. That's why some arrogant white people in this country, some white racists, will threaten black people who speak about the land that we don't want to turn into Zimbabwe. When the ANC took over, they had a target of moving 30% of land into black hands in 5 years. 30%. It was going to be farmland. It was going to be, I think, 7.5 million hectares of the farmland at the time. I knew I was going to mess this up. No, forget the 7.5 million hectares. Of the 77.5 million hectares of land owned by white people at the time, the ANC aimed to move 30% of this within 5 years, or about 23 million hectares. By 1999, 5 years later, they'd only moved 1% of the targeted 30%. And in 2018, they'd only managed to move just under 10%. Horrible. Wandile Sihlobo and Johan Kirsten went and argued that close to or just over 24% of the land had been moved into black hands by 2021. But they went on and included not just the land of the ANC, but included money that the ANC or the ANC-led government had paid out to people that were meant to get land, but opted for money, or where the landowner wasn't really willing to sell, but the people were like, look, we'll take money instead. And they included land that black people had bought on their own. Black people have bought over 2 million hectares on their own, outside of government, since 1994. Over 2 million of the 122 million hectares on their own. The ANC-led government arguably has moved 7.5 million hectares of farmland into black hands, which accounts for this just under 10%. From the article, our estimates, which include restitution, redistribution, private transactions, and state procurement, suggest that 13.2 million hectares, or 17%, have already been transferred from white landowners to the state. An additional 3.08 million hectares have been transferred to black owners, and 10.135 million hectares through private and state-supported transactions, including land restitution. Adding 2.339 million hectares of land that was identified for restitution, but for which communities elected to receive financial compensation as the means for restitution, brings the total area of land rights that were restored since 1994 to 15.56 million hectares. That is the equivalent to 20% of formerly white-owned land. This was back in, I think this article is from 2021 by Wandile Sihlobo and Johan Kirsten. Wandile Sihlobo in another article writes this. Let me try and find this. He writes that by 2024, over 24% of the land had been moved. Not necessarily government pursued, because that comes up to about 10, but including other money that had been paid and. Some of the important questions that need to be asked. How much land, how much money has been paid in restitution? Where is that money today, and where are those communities and those families today? How much of the land has been taken by government officials or some of their friends, whether in business or in politics, through corruption? Land was bought through government money from a white landowner and given to a cadre, to a comrade somewhere, or to one of their friends or their family members. How much of the land that has been taken, that is maybe under state ownership, is currently being leased to politically connected people? I'm aware that some of the land under state ownership is being leased to politically connected people at some of the most ridiculous amounts. In this country, we've got golf clubs, huge pieces of land, sports clubs, huge pieces of land that are being leased to either companies or non-profit organizations at something like 1,000 rand a year for something like 100 hectares, if not more. There are politically connected people that are farming, that have game farms, that have nature reserves, etc., on 500 hectares of land, 1,000 hectares of land. And they have 30-year leases, 50-year leases, 100-year leases, 99-year leases with the government, where they are paying 100 rand a year, 500 rand a year. These are some of the conversations we're not having because land is not being discussed. Some of your most famous ANC politicians own farms. No one asks where they get these farms from. They are farmers today, they own livestock. Where did you get the land from? And was the process fair? Was this land meant for certain communities? And you guys decided to take it. Let me wrap up this data, and this data is what's going to be most important. And this data is what we need to talk about more than anything. South Africa has 122 million hectares of land. Half of this land, if you want to call it half, is farmland. At 37 million hectares of the 77, a big majority of that farmland is owned by white people. Some of it by coloreds, some of it by Indians, very little by black people, 3%. But black people have been trying over time to buy some of this land. They've been trying to challenge government and to get some of this land. Some have been successful, some not. Of this big pie of land that we have called South Africa, 14% is under state control or ownership. 14% of the land is under communal, tribal ownership or control. Under trusts, your Ngonyama Trust with 2.8 million hectares. There's land owned by the Royal Bafokeng. There's land in the Eastern Cape. There's land in Mpumalanga. There's land in the Free State and other parts of the country that is under tribal ownership, where 17 million people live, or 16 million people, 16 million South Africans live. We have got black people that, through labor, teachers, police officers, administrators, nurses, have managed to buy their own pieces of land, residential and urban land, their own houses. They've gotten title deeds in the townships. Some of them have been able to buy small holdings, plots, farms, if they can afford it. And they've been accumulating land as they can. Some through businesses. Black people that are running enterprises that own land and are constantly trying. Our government has failed to take this land audit of 2017. Look at this 122 million hectares. Ring fence all the land that black people were forced off of and say, as of tomorrow, this land is now under state ownership. So instead of 14%, you go to something like 70% of the land. Yes, white man, you will remain on your land, but please know that until we resolve this, this is not your land anymore. Cause the markets to shift and people go crazy. We're turning into Zimbabwe. You're like, we're not doing that. We're fixing the 1913 Native Lands Act. But we're not going to do it clumsily. But we're not going to allow these people to retain their land. Stay there for now. But the title deeds that you have, these companies and trusts that own this land, don't own it anymore. It is now under the government. Yes, we'll put your trust, your company, your private title deed next to it and say, yes, it's currently under this family, but this is state land. And until we resolve this issue, please know that at any given time, you will lose this land. You'll either get compensated, you might not. You might be asked to partner with certain black communities to work this land. And if you guys are agreeable, you can stay on this land forever. You might have to lease this land from us, or you might have to buy this land. And we'll say that of this 70% land that was owned by the state, we have successfully sold this to white people. We have successfully leased some of this to white people. We have successfully passed some of this to black people. We have successfully leased some of this to black people. And we are in a very aggressive process of fixing this thing without affecting the economy, without forcefully chucking white people off, but making sure that there is justice, at least land and spatial justice in this country. Very importantly. And if that's not going to happen, we need to agree as a country, we need to agree as South Africans that it's never going to happen. And black people need to be honest about we are never going to get the land back. This is the current situation with the land. And what we're choosing to do is to make money and buy up the land parcels we can and redistribute it to our people. Or we are willing to illegally occupy parts of land. That's how informal settlements, squatter camps pop up. We are going to illegally occupy certain pieces of land. I remember Julius Malema saying, if you find a piece of land that you like, go occupy it, which is against the law, but you are trying to fix unjust, unethical, immoral laws of the past, and your current government is not helping you. We will occupy this land which was owned by our forefathers, etc. Or you pick up arms and you fight. You go there with guns, government will have to try and make a plan. Somehow, maybe they'll come and fight you back, and you'll say our government is now the ones oppressing us, like the apartheid government, like the British government before them, to say we do not want you to have land. It is not for you to have. Or black people can say, you know what, it's fine. Let's keep things as they are, and from here, we'll never get the land back, and let's just move forward. Many black people in this country, arguably the majority of black people in this country, do not want land. People will say, no, there's no such thing. There is. Black people in South Africa will leave villages, will leave townships, and migrate to another township or an informal settlement, a squatter camp, in urban areas close to cities because they are looking for opportunities to make money. They will leave big parcels of land to go and live in a shack because they want money. If it was only about land, many black people would go and live on Ingonyama Trust land. They'd go and live on other tribal communal land. They would go somewhere else, but they don't. They are economic migrants from the Eastern Cape, from the Free State, from KwaZulu, from Mpumalanga, from Limpopo, from other parts of the country that gravitate towards a Durban, that gravitate towards a Johannesburg, that gravitate towards a Cape Town, looking for opportunities for a better life, not looking for land. But of course, one of the conversations is it's because their land doesn't have opportunity. And the question becomes, who is meant to fix this? Is it government? Is it meant to be the people that are meant to farm and work the land or develop properties or find some type of tourist attractions? That becomes a very important conversation. The average black person in this country asked, they can lie to you in the comments, they can lie on polls on Twitter. The average black person in this country asked, would you like 2 hectares of land, or would you like a job that gives you 30,000 rand a month? I can tell you now they'll take the job. Some of them, you'll give them the land, let them have it for 5 years, and then thereafter ask them, do you still want to keep the land or do you want a job for 30,000? They will take the job. Because many people have received land and it lies fallow, or they sell it, or they lease it to someone else. Sadly, because our education system in this country is not focused on skills development. The average black child doesn't know how to farm and work the land. They don't understand it. The average black child doesn't know how to develop property on land, especially for commercial purposes. The average black child doesn't understand tourism, that I have a piece of land, I can have a tourist attraction to attract people, whether local tourists or foreign, to come to my piece of land, maybe watch dancing, maybe come watch the ocean or a piece of water, maybe come camp, maybe come hike, and I will make money here. The people are not taught skills. So land to them becomes something useless. I can give you a building on a small piece of land, the room the size of where we shoot on the PENUEL show. And one person will look at this piece of land and say, I will plant spinach and sell that spinach to Spar, Pick and Pay, and make 10,000 rand a month. The next person will say, on this piece of land, I'm going to open a spaza shop and I'm going to sell to people and I'm going to make 20,000 rand a month. The next person will say, on this little piece of land, I'm going to dance every day and people will come watch me and throw money and I'll make 5,000 rand a month. The next person will say, I'll take this piece of land and I'll let a 3-person family come rent it at 800 rand per month. The next person will take this piece of property and land and say, I'm going to put a call center in here, and there's going to be 10 people that work in a call center, and the call center will generate 40,000 Rand a month. The next person will say, I'm going to take this little room, turn it into a hedge fund, and I'm going to bring hedge fund managers, and we're going to manage 100 million Rand here, and we're going to be making R1 million a month on this same piece of property, based on your skills, based sometimes on your location, based on how industrious you can create this space. There's a joke that's always thrown around that if you took all the inhabitants of Sandton and you moved them to Alex forcefully, and you took all the inhabitants of Alexandra Township, and you've pushed them into Sandton, within 10 years, Alexandra will have developed and Sandton will have deteriorated. Because sometimes it's not about the land. It is about the skills and the mindset of the person on that piece of land. Saul Kerzner, successful Jewish entrepreneur in South Africa, went to an obscure piece of land. It might have been tribal, if I'm not mistaken. An obscure piece of land, and he built Sun City in the middle of nowhere. It's become a huge tourist attraction, makes a lot of money. Similar move was done in the desert in Nevada to build Las Vegas. Today, the Afrikaner community of Oranje has gone into the Northern Cape, obscure, no one wants to go there, it's far, to go and build their own settlement there. And it's become a bit of a tourist attraction, their own town, they're industrializing. You can bring a group of talented people into an informal settlement, a squatter camp, and they can turn it into something beautiful. So the average South African is not looking for land. They are looking for a job. They're looking for the ability to run a business and enterprise, make a bit of money and have a life. And for people that speak about, once I have my land and my farm, let's do this exercise, which I love doing. If you've been paying attention, how much land is South Africa? 122 million hectares. How many people do we have in South Africa? According to stats, census, 62 million. Assuming that the whole of South Africa is viable land, and if we said, you know what, we're snapping our fingers, everyone is getting their fair share, every South African would get 2 hectares of land. That's 2 rugby fields. It's a good piece of land. 2 hectares. Now, assuming that half of the country is rock, it's mountain, you can't really build anything on there, you can't really farm. Let's say half, just for ease of understanding. That means each of us is meant to sit on 1 rugby field. If you ever get a chance, go onto a rugby field, maybe go onto a soccer field, and be like, according to Pen, this is what I'm supposed to own by myself. What would I do with this piece of land if I owned it? 1 hectare. That's for 1 person. Obviously, if you're a family of 3, it's 3 hectares. When we speak about land redistribution, when we speak about land equity, when we speak about land justice, there are black people in this country that own 10 hectares, 50 hectares, 100 hectares. We would have to take land away from them. And they'll tell you, no, but Chief, I can't run a successful enterprise if you take away my land. But that's the argument that many white people, some colored, some Indian, make as well. That's where ex-President Thabo Mbeki speaks about land should be given to those who can work it. South Africa as a country, according to the ANC and their leaders, is a country that belongs to everyone in it. But Thabo Mbeki said the land must be given to those who can work it. A family like the Van Sales of ZZ2 in Limpopo. A family like the Karen family of livestock, Karen beef. A family like the Wilde-Clover family, the Clover families, the Rainbow Chicken families, the families like the Mutsipes that mine, families like the Ruperts, families like the Oppenheimers that can work land, and other such families. The Mia family that owns all the land at Waterfall City, Mall of Africa, and those developments there by Midrand in Johannesburg. Give the land to those who can work it, because at least they'll be productive and they can create jobs for everyone else. And that becomes a philosophical conversation. And you wish you could actually take everyone through this process where we give you 2 hectares and we say, I will give you this land for 6 months, a year. And then please decide afterwards, do you want to give this land back? Do you want to sell it? Do you maybe want to lease it? Who are you leasing it to, at what rate? Or do you want to earn some skills acquire some skills and go get a job or start a business. And be honest, and let South Africans, black South Africans say, I've decided that I don't want the land. What I actually want is I want a decent job earning me a decent wage where I can afford to buy a house and acquire my own land over 20 years with my property, where over time working for this company, I can work my way onto this farm to lease my own piece of land or to buy my own piece of land on this farm because I'm now ready, where I can maybe rent a flat. I have a nice car. I have a good time on the weekends, but my life is pretty comfortable. My kids are comfortable as well. The average white family doesn't own a lot of land. They also have their own little house that's on a little stand of maybe 150 square meters. They have a bond like other people. If without their jobs, they are stranded. Some people are moving into multi-generational homes where there are 3 families living on one property. They don't have 2 hectares. They also need jobs. They're also trying to get by. Rates and taxes are murdering us. So it's something to think about. That if we were to divide the land that we have by everyone, it's 2 hectares, assuming that half of it is not viable, 1 hectare. What would you do with that? Do you really want land? Because the other thing to consider is, no, I'll take the land. Okay, we're going to send you to the Northern Cape. Aye. To Kuruman. Aye. Which land do you want? No, I want the land there by Santa. No, it's already been assigned. I want the land close to the Durban coast, close to Mhlanga, close to Camps Bay. No, that's already been assigned. We found your good piece of land in Rustenburg. We found your good piece of land in the rural areas of Mutu. No, I don't want that land. You cannot choose. That's how we've assigned it. No, then I'd rather go live in the city, in a squatter camp. That's what people are choosing every single day. To rather be where the economic activities are happening and not build and industrialize and develop the pieces of land that they and their families have. Some of us in our families, if we took the title deeds, if we took the places we are leasing and we put that all together, you'd realize your own family of maybe 100 people owns 300 hectares of land. And if you guys could take that land, put it under one trust, you could use that land to raise funds. You could build a shopping center. You could build a huge farm. But you don't have that type of visionary leadership in your family. And that's why all of you are scattered. Some are renting, some own, some are in the townships, some in suburbia, some are looking for jobs. But if you were to do a land audit of your own family, never mind the whole country, your own family, myself, my brother, my sister, my mom, my cousins, my aunts, uncles, and you're like, okay, you rent, okay, we can exclude that. Or maybe we can include it because maybe we can create some type of commercial enterprise with this land because you're renting at a flat in La Lucia. No, we can rent that out. We can create some type of maybe Airbnb. Even though you're renting it, you can invite tourists to come and stay there. You can be a tour guide, and now we're making money. Other family members are in the township. No, my land is in the township. No, Baba. We can find a tourist attraction, or you can do something on that piece of land. Plant spinach, cabbage, onions, etc. Do a land audit of your family and say, how can we successfully use this land to be able to build this family into something special? Can we create a trust, a family trust, to put some of this land on under? And can we develop our family into something special? But that requires visionary leadership. A lot of families are broken. A lot of families are fighting with each other. They can't work together. They can't even come together in a stokvel. Stokvel is too far. Some families, you set up a WhatsApp group and people start leaving the group because they're like, I saw you added Usizwe in this group. I saw you added Ukhumutso. Why did you add him? I saw you added Antibani. I hate that aunt. She's beefing with my father. So we can't even create a WhatsApp group. And then we need to do a land audit. My last point number 8. Imagining the future for South African land and the idea of mixed ownership models that are available. Our ideologies in South Africa are very different. There are people that believe in generally capitalism, which is most of us. There are people that believe in socialism, and I'd like to think a lot of us agree with some sort of socialism. Socialism is essentially your poor relatives being able to send their kids to a school that is either cheap or free because they can't afford it. You're like, hey, look, If my tax money is going to ensuring that my nieces and nephews have a decent education, I don't mind. My grandmother going to a clinic and getting her medicine for free. It's a functional clinic or hospital. Come on, Fitz. I'll pay for that with my money. That's a form of socialism. There's aggressive socialism, and then there's communism. Aggressive government, state ownership of everything, which most people don't agree with. But our ideologies are different. There are people in this country who want government to become smaller and to stay away from privatizing a lot of industry but when you privatize industry, you've seen what privatization does. The chasing of profit over people, where you end up firing people, they poor, you're getting into funny business practices just to make money and returns for your shareholders. I mean, it's the reason why we had colonization. It's the reason why we had transatlantic slave trade, the slavery in America with the cotton plantations. It's the reason we had exploited labor in South Africa when it was the black indigenous people in the mines. Then they brought in Indians to work the sugarcane fields in KZN. They brought in Malaysians to work in the Western Cape, and we have Cape Malays today. It's from there. Today we have illegal immigrants. In South Africa, Mozambique, Lesotho, Eswatini, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi. In places like America, they have the Mexicans. In parts of Europe, they've got immigrants from all over. Nigerians go and become immigrants everywhere. I fantasize about the idea of having pilot projects around the country, finding small towns, very small towns, and experimenting with ownership models. For example, the people don't own the land. It's owned by whoever runs the town, and the people there benefit from whoever the owner is. In essence, South Africa has already got these things, and I just wish they could be formalized. Ingonyama Trust, as a concept under King Misuzulu, has 2.8 million hectares. Imagine if Ingonyama Trust was given the right to operate as almost a unique state. Not a unique state, but like a unique state where Misuzulu can enforce his own tax, and from the tax of his people there, he develops Ingonyama Trust. Almost like a Bantustan or a homeland, TBV state. Because currently Ingonyama Trust is under trust, but Misuzulu gets an allowance from government, number one. It's a lot of money. I think it's over 100 million if I'm not mistaken. On top of that, the people on Ingonyama Trust have their services provided by the same government. They have RDP houses built, they get free clinics, free schools, roads, electricity, running water built by the government. It is not by their king, like let's say Swatini under King Mswati. Now imagine if Ingonyama Trust, it doesn't even need to be all 2.8 million hectares. It can be 1 million hectares to say this will be under King Misuzulu and he will run it as a monarch. He can have a prime minister, they can raise their own tax, and they will industrialize how they wish. They will mine how they wish. They will create farms how they wish. They will create business people however they wish. You do the same with certain trusts. Let's say, for example, the Van Sale family in Limpopo with ZZ2 as a company. They have a trust and they say on this trust you guys can operate almost like your own state. The Van Sale families are the kings or the presidents or the lords of that area, and all the people living on that land, their employees, etc., etc. The schools will be built for the Van Sales, the clinics will be built by the Van Sales. Any entrepreneurs on there, whether it's trucking, mining, farming, hospitals, retail stores are going to be reporting to the Van Sales. There are people that speak about an independent Cape and the Western Cape becoming an independent state. And I've said to some of them, I don't believe in an independent Cape. Number one, because I think it's malicious and there's undertones of racism there. The Western Cape, black people and colored people live a poor life. I've said to them, tongue in cheek, you can have the Cape, but as long as you are not allowed to operate your businesses in the rest of South Africa. Because what makes the Western Cape rich is the fact that your Woolworths, your Pick n Pay, your ShopRite, your Pepco, some of your big businesses, some of your banks, Capitec, they have their headquarters there. But they milk all their money from the rest of South Africa. And if you were to switch off that money they milk from the rest of South Africa, all of a sudden they don't have the wealth that they have anymore. Similar to Johannesburg. Johannesburg is rich because it milks from the rest of South Africa. Yes, it redistributes through tax and those things, but it is not at an equal rate as it does here in Johannesburg, Gauteng. So if we were to have these mixed land ownership models that get to be allowed to run autonomously without being supported by the rest of government, and to say, let's see how you do these things. And then to study other models in the rest of the world. They speak about nationalization. Give those political parties that want nationalization, give them some of the state-owned land and say, listen, this 14% of the land is being nationalized, it's owned by the state. So we're actually going to give you 500,000 hectares to run your pilot of what nationalization would look like. Because it sounds cute that you want to nationalize, but we'll give you, no, we don't want that. No, then that means you don't want to nationalize land. You specifically want to take over certain industries that you haven't built. Go build your own. In Hong Kong, which is not a part of mainland China, last I checked, Hong Kong is state-owned. No one in Hong Kong can own land, it's leased. But businesses run there comfortably. They get into lease agreements. I think something like Eswatini, you don't really own land there, it's owned by the king. You lease. On the same Ngonyama Trust in South Africa, there are leases there, you get a permission to occupy. There are white people, there are Indian people, there are colored people, there are foreigners from Europe, from America, that go onto Ngonyama Trust land and they sign leases to be able to farm, mine, build businesses on that land that is under the trust of the king. Some of your politicians have got leases with certain kings and chiefs to have game, to have farms, to have tourist attractions, including big business people, white, Indian, colored, doesn't matter, on tribal land. That is state-owned land. In a way, it's under a trust, but it's under a king of sorts. To say, let's trial these things. But for the majority of South Africans, I think we need to move away from the concept of wanting land that we are not ready to work. Number one, and I also want to speak about apprenticeship. I spoke about the formula of the economy, land plus capital plus labor. The quality of our labor has become very, very weak. And if we could invest very much in our labor so that the people are highly skilled, they will very easily be able to raise capital, to buy equipment and from there very comfortably be able to buy land or lease land because of their labor, their skills. You imagine a doctor, you imagine an engineer, a lawyer, a chartered accountant. With the amount of money they make, 50,000 Rand, 100,000 Rand, 150,000 Rand a month, they can comfortably take that money and go buy whatever tools they need, a truck, a tractor, whatever it is. They can comfortably take that money and even buy labor. They can take that money and they can lease land or they can buy land and they can start enterprising because of the quality of labor that they have. We are not investing enough in our labor. We need especially white people that still own big chunks of land. We need them to come to the party so that at no point do we have some Adolf Hitler or some dictator that comes and really lights a spark and gets black people to be so angry that we go into a civil war. We need white people that own a lot of land, that have a lot of money to come to the table and say, we want to work and set up aggressive apprenticeship programs. We are going to agree to, on our farms, on our properties, have these programs where black kids are being developed aggressively to learn how to run these things. Yes, we understand that they might be more talented than our own children, but we believe that if we work together, they will serve South Africa and our own families as a whole. We're bringing Siya Kolisi. We are training him aggressively so that one day he and his family take over the Springboks. But they will do it in such an amazing way because they are skilled, they understand the history, so they won't exclude white people because of racism. They won't exclude black people because of racism. They'll say, look, we were brought in by white people at a time when maybe we couldn't even afford to be in these circles, to learn and get the skills and travel and understand so that we can develop. People like Patrice Motsepe, you bring them to the table, you school them, they become apprentices, and you say, I own 100 hectares of land. Come work as a laborer, Patrice, you and your family. Once you have some kind of skills, I will give you out of my 100 hectares, 10 hectares as a lease to work the land. And then over time, I'll give you more land. And at some point, once I feel you're strong enough, can we please create a company or a trust for our families to merge and work this land together. And who knows, maybe our children, grandchildren will end up marrying each other so that we make sure that this is how we secure land. We might laugh about it now, but if I want Johan Rupert's land, if I want Christo Visa's land, if I want Nikki Oppenheimer's land, one of the easiest ways to ensure my family gets in there is to either my son or my daughter, they marry into that family and they have children. And those children become direct beneficiaries of whatever Umkhulu has built, expropriated, stolen, whatever, conquered over time. Even in black families, this is how some arranged marriages came about. We have a king that owns a lot of land and a lot of livestock. We are maybe skilled at certain things, or we have a beautiful family of beautiful daughters. They marry into the royal family. Our daughter marries into the royal family, or our son, so that the offspring they bring our family into the royal family. And this is now imagine if you do it like that, where a white farmer, landowner says, listen, I want to do apprenticeship. I don't trust black people. So I want to handpick some of the black people I work with. And I want us to have an agreement that some of our children will have arranged marriages so that the offspring protect us as white people and protect some of the black people so that in future we're all protected. Maybe let me stop there. The land issue in South Africa, very complex, very complicated, very layered. Yeah, let me stop there. I encourage you guys to share your thoughts, to share your opinions, to share your disagreements, hopefully to share some really, really cool ideas on how we can resolve this thing. Outside of the fictional reality, the objective reality, land, no land, a job, what you ultimately want for at least black South Africans is a sense of dignity, a sense of home, a sense of knowing that I have a fair opportunity in this country to compete and have my 40 acres and a mule and work. Once the average black child, white child, colored child, Indian child in this country and maybe on the African continent has that, where I have a skill, and because of my skill and my labor, it depends on how hard I'm willing to work, that I'll accumulate capital and I'll accumulate land, but it is on me. It is not because I'm kept out by a Native Lands Act. It is not because I'm kept out by a black economic empowerment. It is not because I'm kept out by some frivolous labor laws, business laws, red tape, because there are certain families, white families, black families, Indian families, that have created laws that have made it impossible for me to compete fairly with my skills and my labor. Once we can give people that, you don't even need to give them land. There are foreigners in this country that are accumulating land. They are not black South African. They are not white South African. They came here. They brought their labor, their mindset, their attitude. They put in work and they've made money and they've begun accumulating their own land. Thank you for joining us on the PENUEL show. PENUEL, the Black Pen. Cheers.